Part 1. Trojan Horse. Chapter 1. The last major components of the Fifth Fleet came into view outside the windscreen. A main gunship, over 1,200 meters in length and carrying almost 1 million kilotons of destructive power, became visible as the RCC Evil was riding shotgun in passed over the top of a skyscraper-sized asteroid. A pair of sleek F-150s banked into view, deftly weaving between two smaller but faster-moving rock bodies. It was at times like this that he most wished he could take the controls. This was the best part of the solar system to learn to fly. A lot of pilots used to avoid it, but these days it was where most of the action was, and the more hours you logged in the asteroid field, the better it would look for your career. "Sir, we've been cleared to go out," the pilot said. He was a young man, a second lieutenant. Evil looked out the windscreen on the side of the cockpit. A pair of soldiers in camouflage-patterned spacesuits were doing preventative maintenance on an anti-spacecraft artillery radar emitter. The battery was dug into a stabilized 6-kilometer asteroid. Its orbit rendered geosynchronous to Earth's position in the solar system. It served as a gateway to the demilitarized zone that the asteroid field had become. Those 150s are going to escort us to point 25. There we'll land on Boniface, where we'll transfer to a mule. Evil nodded at the pilot's itinerary. He looked over at the main gunship as they passed it. The opening end of the craft's gun barrel was the size of a football stadium. Its commander, Captain Ridley, was probably a little too far out according to armistice agreements. But that wasn't Evil's issue. "Lieutenant?" Evil turned to the speaker. A strong-featured black man in stone-patterned fatigues and load-bearing gear strapped with the very latest equipment available for the infantry. The soldier was floating in the tube between the cockpit and the troop-carrying section of the Falcon. It was clear the man was comfortable in zero-G because he only had to barely touch the metal walls with his black-gloved fingers in order to maintain a neutral position. "Is there going to be any press on Boniface?" "I don't know, Sergeant Woods," Evil replied, "but I doubt it. Don't worry about it either way. They aren't going to notice anything unusual by seeing us." Sergeant Elmo Woods smiled. He lingered for a moment to appreciate the view before darting back to rejoin the rest of the squad. The RCC flew in formation with the F-150s up a corridor of stabilized asteroids. Smaller rocks and dust drifted through the lane, and occasionally one struck the hull with a dull thud. Evil knew the pilots of those 150s probably preferred flying outside of these corridors, out where the asteroids flew free. The rough, they called it. As the stones ahead parted, the huge rock of Boniface came into view. An asteroid about a quarter the size of Australia, Boniface was home to 16 bases supporting listening posts, radar installations, and infantry guard posts spread across this section of the asteroid belt. They passed another anti-spacecraft battery on a rock hovering above Boniface. It would be the last one they'd see on their journey out. The armistice forbade putting weapons that powerful any closer to the ceasefire line, and for the most part, the Republic tried to honor the armistice. The other side, though. "Sir, we are cleared for landing on Victor 1 Charlie. Evil just nodded and watched as they passed a mountain range that could swallow the Himalayas. At the foot of one of those craggy slopes, a small squared-off area was illuminated by bright searchlights set on 30-foot poles. The pilot brought the RCC down on the edge of a football field-sized landing pad that already had an assortment of a half-dozen other craft parked on it. A black erasable marker tied to a string dropped between Evil and the pilot, reminding Evil that this asteroid had some gravity. "You won't need to suit up, sir. We're on a descending platform that will take us into the hangar," the pilot said. "That's a nice change." The pilot kept speaking to ATC, and he made a few notations on the plastic pad strapped to his leg with the black marker. The platform lowered, and Evil's last look at space for the next few hours was a view of the two 150s banking and heading back in. Fighter craft were also restricted from moving any further than Boniface by the armistice. Evil released his safety harness and climbed back out of the cockpit and into the troop compartment. Sergeant Woods was talking to his fire team leaders while the 20 other Rangers were adjusting their own weapons and equipment. While Evil was wearing a dark blue flight suit with a blast pistol strapped under his left arm and a few small pouches of basic survival gear and reloads for his blast pistol, the Rangers were all wearing stone-patterned camouflage fatigues. Their combat vests were covered with extra magazines for their blast rifles, pulse, fragmentation, and signal grenades, combat knives, signal panels, first aid kits, and portable computers. When he saw Evil was in the compartment, Sergeant Woods turned in his direction. "Sir, these are my 3 squad leaders, Sergeant Westmore, Sergeant Lee, and Sergeant Baxter." The NCOs all nodded in Evil's direction. He didn't expect any saluting out this far from Earth, and this close to the enemy. "Hangar Bay is pressurized," the pilot announced over the RCC's loudspeaker. A flight crewman was lowering the large ramp in the rear, and a moment later, the soldiers were stepping out into the blue-tinged light. There was another RCC visible through the plexiglass window, showing the bay next door. The bay on the other side of them had a pair of smaller troop transport craft called mules. A large man in a camouflage pressure suit came in through the service door. It was unstrapped in the front of a DR-5, a smaller version of the BR-5 that most of the Rangers carried, was hanging across his chest. His hair was a bit longer than regulation, and where most people would have slowed their stride to regard the Rangers with some awe, the Rangers took a moment to regard this man with awe. He was in Special Operations Detachment Sierra. Some of the most highly trained soldiers in the military were Sierra. When he casually approached Evil and initiated a friendly conversation that only people long familiar with each other could have, the others realized that Evil was probably from Sierra as well. "Good to see you, Dean," Evil said to the man in the pressure suit. Dean smiled, looked at the squad of Rangers, and then looked at Evil. "This gonna work?" he asked. "I don't know. You tell me," Evil responded. He gestured for Sergeant Woods to join them as they stepped through the airlock. The 3 of them went down a shiny white corridor to an elevator that took them up 1 level. They showed their IDs to a pair of MPs outside the conference room they needed. Inside was a wide table surrounded by high-backed chairs. A couple men in camouflage pressure suit pants, t-shirts, and black ball caps were hunched over a laptop at the end of the table. Evil recognized them as almost immediately as the 2 other men who'd been on Dean's recon team when they'd made the discovery. "Hey, Chet, Vince, you guys the audio-visual club now?" Evil joked. Dark-haired Chet just looked up for an instant and smiled before returning his attention to the laptop keyboard. Vince extended a hand. "This is Sergeant Woods of the regiment," Evil said. Sergeant Woods just nodded stiffly to the Sierra operators, who smiled at him by way of a greeting. He had worked with Sierra before, but he was always uncomfortable with them when they were ambiguous about rank. "Have a seat, gentlemen," Vince said. "We are ready to begin." Once they were all settled, a full-color hologram of the solar system sprang up over the table. The bright images of the planets with their orbits marked by red ovals came into sharper focus as someone dimmed the lights. "Okay, I know a lot of this is going to be review for you guys, and I don't mean to insult your intelligence, but I'm also practicing for the briefing I'm giving General Collins, and he likes things put into context. So," Dean said, and he took a breath. "As you know, the inner solar system, out to the asteroid belt, is controlled by the Republic of Earth forces. Here, that area is indicated by the blue grid. On cue, the empty space of the inner solar system was filled by a lattice of glowing blue boxes. The area beyond the asteroid belt is controlled by the Triton Empire. After fighting a 5-year-long distance war waged almost entirely by exchanges of long-range rocket fire, the 2 sides agreed to the asteroid field and surrounding sphere as the line of demarcation between the 2 sides. With this, a transparent glowing red dome extended from the asteroid field over the northern and southern hemispheres of the inner solar system. As per the Armistice Agreement of 2150, the asteroid belt is a designated demilitarized zone. The only official military presence allowed there is for observational purposes to make sure both sides are observing the armistice agreement, and the only weapons allowed are defensive in nature. Dean tapped a key on the laptop. And while the definition of defensive in nature is open to disagreement between reasonable people, no one ever had anything like this in mind. The holographic display zoomed in on a particular group of asteroids until they were the size of furniture hovering over the table. After tapping a few more keys, a box appeared beneath the asteroids. By moving a mouse, Dean was able to position the box over the smaller of the two asteroids, rendering it blue where it was red before. It also gave a view of the interior of the asteroid, which was hollowed out and filled with decks, machinery, and bulkheads. But the image was only clear for a moment. Horizontal lines of distortion ran up the image before the whole thing blurred, and then it started over again from the beginning. "They have a Trojan rock in the DMZ," Sergeant Wood said. "We have a few of those, as long as it's on their side of the MDL. This is more than just a surveillance post, Sergeant," Dean said. He increased the magnification inside the box. There was an entire wing of Triton fighters and bombers parked inside narrow bays. About half dozen figures were visible around the craft and working other positions in the concealed hangar. Triton soldiers. They were frozen in position by the image. Sergeant Woods leaned forward. "Well, I'll be." He looked at Dean. "Did you guys get this? You must have been outside the MDL by at least." "That's neat to know for now," Evil said. "But it brings us to our purpose for being out here. We can't present this evidence as is because our acquiring it is evidence of an armistice violation. We are going to stumble on readings of this Trojan while on a routine patrol of the MDL. Dean and his team have the grid coordinates for us to look in. There's a spot on a ridge east of the joint security area on our side of the MDL where we should be able to get a good line of sight. We also set up a GBSA, and we should be able to get something pretty steady." Evil smiled. "And the best part is we're going to time the discovery so we can send the evidence right to the next flag-level meeting of the Military Armistice Commission." "That's this Thursday," Elma Woods said. "Admiral Wellesley is going to be there." "Yup," Evil replied, "and we're going to start our patrol the night before going out of Guard Post Outlet. Sergeant Woods, one of the reasons we picked you is that you've already spent a couple rotations at Outlet, so you know the lay of the land pretty well. You know what sort of games the Tritons play in that area and how to avoid trouble, so we can get down to brass tacks as quickly as possible." Sergeant Woods nodded. "I've run a couple of patrols during flag-level meetings before. The Tritons really pour it on at those times. I didn't know we were parking right under the nose of that much firepower, though. The Trojan surely has a deep PSA and ASA. They're going to know we're there. How long has that thing been there?" "That's right where we're going to be working on," Dean said. Sergeant Woods nodded, but he could only wonder what Dean and his team were going to be up to while he and his men were patrolling along the edge of Triton territory.